The night before Medgar was assassinated, we talked about the closeness to a time when he would not be with us. We both knew that he would be killed.
Support provided for flashbacks and tributes from the summer of '63 is made possible by Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein, a full-service law firm serving the Southeast from offices in Charlotte, Raleigh, Columbia, Charleston, Spartanburg, and Washington, D.C. At Parker Poe, we seek a better future for our clients and our community. On the web at www.parkerpoe.com. And additional support is made possible by the Arts and Science Council of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, and by PBS Charlotte viewers like you. Thank you.
Heartbreak and hardship from a Mississippi murder.
When I'm here, I have the spirit of Dad protecting us.
Comfort came from a sitting president, and words of encouragement were delivered by a former leader who once occupied the Oval Office.
Medgar Evers just came home from war and said, hey, I want to vote. I want to have a say in the affairs of my community.
Once reviled by many in his state, he has been revered more than 50 years later.
Of all Mississippians, always remembering what Medgar was fighting, never forgetting what it took for him to mount that battle.
It was an ambush that happened in this very driveway during the darkness of night. A single gunshot ended the life of a man who carried out sacrifice and service. Hello and welcome, I'm Steve Crump. Medgar Evers was a Mississippi native who was born in the town of Decatur. He was a husband, father, and brother. Before he died in this spot in June of 1963, many of the local efforts he carried out received national attention. Evers will be known for his tireless dedication in the areas of civil rights and voting rights. And more than 50 years later, countless individuals look to his lessons through remembrance and rededication. The Supreme Court's 1954 far-reaching measure didn't go the distance in providing legal remedies from wrongs of the past. The famous Brown versus Board ruling was primarily designed to end separate and unequal schools. It became the law of the land during the very same year Medgar Wiley Evers accepted the job as NAACP Field Secretary for the state of Mississippi.
I have to say that I was still in a state of shock from losing Medgar and actually seeing everything happen.
Keeping such a meaningful legacy alive is the self-imposed mission of his widow, Myrlie Evers Williams.
So the memories are there. I used those memories initially to fuel the hatred that I had at that time. And the hatred was necessary, a necessary evil, because it was all I had to hold on to carry me through a period of time.
The fact when Medgar Evers begins to really kind of challenge inequality and oppression, he understands full well. It's not surprising to him that it's a possibility he could be killed for it.
In his biography, Medgar Evers, Mississippi Martyr, Mississippi State University professor Dr. Michael Vincent Williams wrote, Medgar displayed resilience and diplomacy whenever faced with issues concerning fair play and equal opportunity.
Now, the potential for that had always been in Mississippi. So this wasn't anything new in terms of African Americans understanding that violence could be the result, and most oftentimes was the result, for resisting oppression.
Across the Magnolia State, Evers would be summoned to the homes of those who were murdered at the hands of white supremacists. One well-publicized case he investigated was the death of 15-year-old Emmett Till, who was killed in 1955 by a group of vigilantes for allegedly whistling at a white woman.
I am a beneficiary of his efforts to secure liberty and justice for us all.
His work and life would greatly influence the career of a Mississippi-born network news correspondent.
I went to schools where the principal, the teacher, the counselor, lunchroom staff, everybody was black.
Everything was segregated. We had there were facilities for African Americans. What we were concerned about in terms of social conditions were to be able to use public facilities.
Lunch counters were segregated, clothing stores. If you were African American and you went to a clothing store, you could not try on clothes.
We couldn't go to the pools, we couldn't go to the movie theaters, we couldn't go to any of the things that were supported by the state or federal government.
The deeply etched dividing lines of race were part of the ingrained DNA of many communities. Well-placed reminders were routinely put out in the open for all to see, and cities like Leland, Mississippi served up a stiff dose of Jim Crow rule that was loud, bold, and many times right in your face.
As a white girl, it wasn't a good idea for me to be, rambling around the Delta back then. This was before Freedom Summer.
Back then, Joan Mulholland was on the front lines as a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and even rubbed elbows with one of the movement's iconic leaders. Defiance against established rules of a different time in America even landed her in jail as a freedom rider in Mississippi.
Mississippi viewed itself as the last bastion of the Confederacy, and the politicians played that up.
Change was slow to come many years after the Brown decision. 8 years later, attitudes and emotions boiled over in the college town of Oxford during October of 1962.
James H. Meredith is formally enrolled at the University of Mississippi, ending one chapter in the federal government's efforts to desegregate the university. Much of this film record was destroyed when our cameraman, Gordon Yoder, was attacked, but he did salvage pictures of Governor Ross Barnett at the scene. The governor fought the court order long and bitterly before modifying his stand, saying Mississippi was overpowered by the federal government.
You had James Meredith admitted to University of Mississippi in the fall of '62, and so you had a lot of things like that were taking place. The Freedom Riders just a year before that, and so there were a lot of things that were kind of happening leading up to this. It was really Mississippi, and Jackson in particular, was really, in a lot of ways, close to exploding. It was just this tension and a lot of things.
Maybe the white power structure drew lines in the sand, but in our minds and our hearts, there were no lines, there were no limits. We were getting ready for another day, a brighter day, a day that Medgar Evers helped to make happen.
Easing the pain of dire social conditions for deprived African Americans in Mississippi was a priority for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. The organization's leadership, that included the legendary Thurgood Marshall and Roy Wilkins, carried out a statewide plan to combat racism, but in some locales, violence was a way of life. By 1963, lunch counter sit-ins had been resolved in other parts of the South, but in Mississippi, the demonstrations were added to the list of causes that attracted organized protest. The fallout was taking a very heavy toll on the state's field director.
He was dealing with tensions with other civil rights organizations, with who was going to get the credit for this voter registration campaign, or who was going to get the funds to do this or that. I mean, it was a struggle on so many levels every day.
And Medgar was exhausted. And so you're starting to see this, and he's just so tired by this point. And of course, you can imagine this has been going on for weeks now.
The last days of his life, Evers would score a coup by bringing Lena Horne to Jackson for an NAACP rally, but the walls were starting to close in.
The night before Medgar was assassinated, we talked about the closeness to a time when he would not be with us. We both knew that he would be killed. I told Medgar that I could not live without him. And his response was, and I quote, "You are tougher than you think you are."
The course of American history would vastly change one state and 185 miles away from Jackson. Black students, with the assigned help of federal troops, were admitted to the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa for the first time on June 11, 1963. The timing was relevant.
That night on national television, President Kennedy gets on television and says that the grandsons of slaves are still not free, and gives his first civil rights speech.
We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair.
Medgar Evers has meetings that night and sees the speech himself, and he's coming home, gets home after midnight, pulls into the driveway. The kids are like excited because Daddy's home, you know, and this is very much excitement in their family. And then, of course, they hear a shot.
The assassin shot him at his car, which was parked directly behind mine. And by the time I got to the door, the force of the bullet and his strength allowed him to pull himself around his car to the doorstep, and he could go no further. That is so vivid in my mind.
Well, I was up in Washington, D.C. then. I'd gone up to work at the March on Washington office, and you knew he was going to get killed. So it was more like, it's happened. We knew it was coming, it's happened.
So we knew that Medgar had been assassinated. My Sunday school teacher lived across the street from the Evers, and my Sunday school teacher took in the children while Mrs. Evers dealt with the cops and the coroner and everything she had to deal with on that horrible, horrible day.
When we found out he was killed, we immediately got up and went to his house. And my father and my mother were just devastated. And his body was still in the house when we got there.
The White House offered a platform for a conversation on civil rights and race relations. 2 years before he died in 1961, Medgar Evers and other prominent NAACP leaders would meet with President John F. Kennedy. Evers, like Kennedy, was a veteran of World War II, and Evers, like Kennedy, would die a very violent death and be buried at Arlington National Cemetery.
We must not allow the social issues Sergeant Medgar Evers died for go unaddressed.
The cemetery of his final resting place provided the platform for a litany of tributes, and one day before public accolades were delivered, Myrlie Evers Williams soaked in a moment of meaning.
We pay tribute to him, and he will forever live in our hearts.
Some of Washington's best-known faces were on hand during that humid day in June, and one of the most stirring salutes came from the state's former governor, Ray Mabus.
I was born a generation and 60 miles from where Medgar Evers was in Mississippi.
Mabus was appointed as Naval Secretary by President Obama and found a way of honoring a fellow native son.
First ship that I named for the United States Navy, named in honor of Medgar Evers. And that ship will sail for decades, supporting sailors and Marines who represents the same thing that he did: equality, freedom, opportunity.
1963 was an amazing year in the course of our nation's struggle for a more perfect union.
A former U.S. president reflected on the battle carried out on domestic soil by so many men of color after coming home from World War II.
It can't be that I was a soldier in the American Army and I stood up for freedom and I can't vote. My neighbors can't vote. We're going back into a system that favors control over sharing, domination over cooperation. That'll never do.
So the meaning of Medgar Evers' life is for all of you to say when you're confronted with any challenge today, look for the control side, look for the cooperation side, and choose the right side.
Back in Jackson, many locales carry his name. The state's largest airport and a local library are part of a lengthy list. A statue also bears his likeness, and 50 years later, one place has been transformed and holds special significance.
And we're here today to rededicate this home, rededicate the ideals upon which he lived.
The house at 2232 Margaret Walker Alexander Drive was once a crime scene. It is now a public shrine.
When I'm here, I have the spirit of Dad protecting us. The spirit of him encouraging us to not just look at this driveway, not just look at the window, not just look at the door, not just go inside and remember the night of June 11th, the morning of June 12th. Not just look at the blood that is so etched in my memory as I saw him laying down and he could not get up as many times as my brothers and I said, "Daddy, Daddy, get up." But he looked at us with love. He left us and ingrained in us the love that we carry from now and forever.
Across town at the Hinds County Courthouse, the accused killer in this case, Byron D. LeBeckwith, would be tried 3 times in 30 years, and the first 2 of his trials ended in hung juries.
Let's first give honor and credit to Mrs. Myrlie Evers Williams, who tells us that Medgar told her to take care of his children. And she said, and she made a pledge, that she would find out whoever did it and make sure they were brought to justice, no matter how long it took.
I make very few promises because I don't like to be in a position where I can't keep them. But that was one that I meant.
Jerry Mitchell of the Clarion Ledger did incredible work bringing to light the still living culprits who were out there bragging about what they had done.
So I just kept reporting on it. And then they obviously they reopened the case and then they re-prosecuted it.
This determined journalist relentlessly stayed on the case with a string of stories that first broke in 1988 and ran their course until LeBeckwith was convicted of murder and sent to prison in February of 1994.
Well, that was a sense of relief. It was a sense of relief.
WMPR, Jackson, 90.1 FM, serving Central Mississippi.
On Jackson's FM dial, radio station WMPR remains a viable mouthpiece voicing African American concerns. The mission here comes easy because the station is owned and operated by Medgar's older brother, Charles Evers.
Mayor, we're looking for you for homecoming now. We're looking for you here in June. You and the whole bunch of mayors, come on here.
In the lobby, a lasting tribute honoring the late civil rights leader can be found on the walls, and among the cherished keepsakes, a series of team photos of the 2 brothers when they played football at their alma mater, Alcorn State University. During the time of the assassination and investigation, Charles Evers found himself in the glow of the media spotlight, and 50 years later, he still wrestles with the jarring flashbacks.
I was so full of hate the day I came and found our brother was killed, and I stayed full of hate.
Coping with the reality of 1963 is a public exercise embraced by decision makers at the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. The exhibit titled, "This is Home, Medgar Evers, Mississippi, and the Movement." Articles on display showcase key milestone moments from his life and include the high-powered rifle that took his life. Out of respect and curiosity, the place he lived and raised a family is visited by people from around the world. Minnie Watson of Tougaloo College is the curator of the Medgar Evers home.
Especially when young people come, we want them to go away with an understanding of how things were then, how important it was what Medgar was trying to do.
Following the example left by her late husband, Myrlie Evers Williams and other family members are behind a new initiative. It's called the Evers Institute and has found a home both in Jackson and on the road.
Jerry Mitchell has done more heroic things in his journalism career than I can ever hope to. And Myrlie Evers is Myrlie Evers. So you all are going to enjoy this as much as I am, I hope.
Part of the mission was carried out on the stage of the museum in Washington, D.C., with the specific intentions to educate and inspire social activism.
Medgar trained the children to find the safest place in the house.
Reflective flashbacks of defiant civil disobedience were echoed by former NAACP Chairman Julian Bond.
I was told, if you sit in at this lunch counter, your degree from Morehouse College will be worth more. And you know, it may be hard to make this connection. Why would my degree at Morehouse College be greater because I sat in at the lunch counter? Well, because that led to this, it led to that, it led to this, and I sat in at that lunch counter, and my degree at Morehouse is worth much more than it was then.
Back in Jackson, invitations to a number of celebrations to honor such an incredible life were up in lights all over the city. At the downtown gala, one man was recognized for continuing a journey to justice.
Jerry, we love you. We thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jerry Mitchell was honored by the Medgar Myrlie Evers Institute, and so was blues legend B.B. King. If there was a moment that brought the meaning of such an important life full circle, then the closing words of former Urban League President Vernon Jordan put so much into perspective. He served as the NAACP field director for the state of Georgia, while Evers was the organization's leader in Mississippi.
To honor the memory of Medgar, it is up to us to sit up and take notice, to stand up and take action, and to turn ourselves loose against all the forces of injustice and inequality, poverty and oppression that still abide in our midst. In this way, the sacrifices of the movement will be sanctified, and our friend Medgar Evers will yet live. Thank you. God bless you all.
During a season that seemed to bring a string of unending accolades, more public praise came for this man and the movement he led in Mississippi.
I'll never forget that day because I was in Birmingham and Fannie Lou Hamer and about 6 or 8 of our staff people were in jail in Mississippi.
Former UN Ambassador and Atlanta Mayor Andrew Young applauded the ultimate sacrifice that Evers made and what he stood for during the 2013 commencement address at Johnson C. Smith University.
What we were told is absolutely true, that unearned suffering is redemptive, and we are redeemed by the blood of the martyrs that have gone on before.
Historically black colleges are among the institutions taking the lead in honoring those who have made meaningful sacrifices.
1, 2, 3.
That was the case at Jackson's Tougaloo College. Important lessons are also embraced in the city where Evers took risks and helped usher in an era of change.
He had a wife and he had 3 children. But then to continue to do that, continue to push for equality, continue to fight for the generations that are upcoming, it's all the more key for understanding what real dedication means. You know, what real love for humanity means.
When Medgar Evers was still here 50 years ago, he pushed for Jackson Police to hire its first African-American officer. And so now here we are 50 years later, the majority of the Jackson Police Force these days are African-American.
Redefining the social order didn't solely rest on the shoulders of Medgar Evers. Recognition is also due to the person who remains committed to never let the life's work of her late husband fade away.
So thank you,
And somewhere along the line, over 50 years, came reconciliation. It's been a long journey. It's been a very painful one, but it has helped to shape my life and myself into the person that I am today.
The night that he died in this very driveway, Medgar Evers was 37 years old. Among the magazines that made his death front page news was the NAACP Crisis magazine, the organization's official mouthpiece. One article said, quote, "The Negro of today can be infuriated, but can no longer be intimidated." And that is the lesson of Jackson and Medgar Evers. During the battles and skirmishes along the way, Evers had many opportunities to leave the Magnolia State. He didn't. He said, Mississippi is the place that he loved, and he demonstrated that until the day he died. That's flashbacks and tributes from the summer of '63 from the Medgar Evers house in Jackson, Mississippi. I'm Steve Crump. Thanks so much for joining us.